Hello, and welcome back to my reading of my book, Breadman. If you're just now joining us, I have already read chapters 1 through 8 on my channel before, so you could definitely check out those videos right now. But to give you a quick recap of what's been going on, our hero David has now discovered what's going on. Time travel. But not only that, but the NSA is looking for somebody, and he actually knows exactly who they're looking for. And that brings you up to speed. Let's get cracking. Chapter 9.
Mr. Larson, it is imperative that we need to know how you know this man,
Agent Mulligan stated. David looked back down at the printout. He's my best friend. His name is Andy Campbell. David handed the printout back to Susan. He couldn't believe his best friend was the one behind all of this.
Do you know how to get in touch with him?
No, all I know is that he was working with his father, who I thought was only a car salesman.
Mr. Larson, I know this is very hard on you, but we need you to catch him. He's the only one that knows that you're alive. You're the only one that knows most about him. We believe that you're the right man for the job.
David sat back in the cold metal chair and closed his eyes. He was supposed to bring his best friend into custody. How could he be asked to do such a thing? Thoughts zipped through his mind. He was a super after all. Maybe he was right for the job. He opened his eyes and looked around the room. People hurrying from station to station, carrying papers that needed to be signed, workers printing out documents and rushing them to a large office door at the back of the room. David presumed that was where the supervisor worked. Everyone in this office was doing what was right for the country. How could he refuse to help the country?
Have you made your decision yet?
I'll do it. He doesn't deserve to be free. I'll catch him.
That's what we wanted to hear. Now, go to conference room B. They will debrief you on your mission. Good luck.
David nodded. He knew what he was about to do was going to be dangerous. Somebody could lose their life, but that was a fact that he just had to accept. He walked over to a large tinted glass door with the label Room B. David stood up straight and walked through the door. ... He was angry. He quickly walked down the dark hallway surrounded by concrete. He was in an underground lair. He walked up to the dirty double doors at the end of the hall and kicked them. Both doors flew open as he walked into a very large room. At first glance, this room wouldn't be thought to be underground. In fact, it could be mistaken for a museum room if anyone would see an image of it. "What happened?" he yelled. Two young men stood instantly. The taller of the two spoke up. "He got away, sir." "What do you mean he got away?" Andy asked. He asked this as he walked down 5 steps to get to the lower level where the two were working. Somehow, the 2 agents who captured him were killed. By the time we sent 2 more agents out, NSA found out that they'd been compromised, and they sent their own agents to retrieve him. Andy's face tightened. He closed his eyes in frustration. Quickly, he pulled a pistol tucked in the back of his pants and took the man's life in front of the man's partner. Andy's secretary made a short squeal, but quickly silenced herself, putting a hand to her mouth. "Mr. Fletcher," Andy said, turning to the only man standing, "I trust you can do the right thing and get me David Larson." The frightened man looked down at his friend's body and back up to Andy. Slowly, he nodded. "Good," Andy said, turning back to the way he came from. "Miss Jones, we're going to need a replacement. Oh, and clean that mess up, will you?"
Consider it done, Mr. Campbell.
Andy walked back up the steps he came down and walked back out the door. Cindy Jones stood there for a moment looking at the carcass that Andy had killed. Finally, she walked out the door as well. She needed to get the mop and lighter fluid. Bruce Fletcher crashed in his desk chair. He leaned over, placed his head in his palms, and quietly wept. He couldn't mourn his partner until he was safely away from Andy. If Andy saw one of his employees crying, it would show weakness and he would have him killed. As soon as Cindy returned with her supplies, Bruce sucked it up again and returned back to work. ... David walked out of conference room B. He was given a temporary badge. He was now working for the NSA. Now that he knew what he had to do, David started heading for the door. Susan Mulligan stopped him.
Listen, before you go, you'll need this.
Susan handed him a black watch. David knew this was one of the time continuum watches. He quickly put it on his left wrist. Susan reached her hand out. David took it.
Good luck, Mr. Larson.
You too, David replied. Then he was out of the door. He had a bad feeling as he walked out the front door. Things were beginning to unravel. David could only hope for the best as he walked down the steps that led to the main entrance. He finally reached the bottom of the steps and marveled at what the NSA has provided him. A brand new motorcycle. David stepped on the peg on the right side of the motorcycle and swung his leg over the other side. He reached for the keys the NSA gave him. He turned on the bike and revved it to life. David then reached to the inside of his jacket and pulled out sunglasses. He put the sunglasses on, and he was on the way. Chapter 10. David's first stop was the scene of the crime, the Bank of America where he was shot. He was told there may still be evidence there that he should look at. Heading in the correct direction, David felt something. Disregarding it, he kept his cool, riding the motorcycle. Then he felt it again. This time more forceful and painful. It was his stomach. This was no ordinary stomachache. It felt like all the energy in his entire body was escaping him. Heading on a single road with a little traffic, David felt the next jolt. This one was the most painful. David clutched his stomach with one hand, trying to steer with the other. He was in so much pain when it occurred to him. He knew what he had to do to make it better. That's when he started swerving on the street, and the bike tipped on its side, leaving David tumbling onto the street, grasping his stomach. A man who witnessed the incident was walking out of a grocery store. He saw David lying on the street. He laid his bag of items on the ground and ran towards the hurt man.
My goodness, are you all right?
David faced his helper and said, "Bread!
What?
I need bread!" David said, wincing in pain.
There's a bakery right over there.
The middle-aged man pointed back where he came from. The bakery was right next to the grocery store. It appears that it was right in the middle of a mini-mall. The man helped David up, and he rushed towards the bakery. ... Bruce Fletcher wiped his forehead. His work finally pulled off. The computer screen in front of him had a small red blinking light on the screen. Keeping his eye on the screen, he picked up the phone. "I found him, sir." "Good. Don't lose him. I'll be right down," the voice said on the other line. It didn't take long before Andy Campbell marched through the main doors. He jumped down the steps and headed towards Fletcher. "Where is he?" "He's in some sort of bakery in Kansas."
"Kansas again?"
"Yes, sir. If we set the watch back 15 minutes, we'll most likely catch him this time."
"No, I'll catch him myself. He is not getting away this time."
Andy pulled up the sleeve of his shirt, and he clicked a few buttons on the watch he was wearing, and before Bruce knew it, Andy was gone. ... David rushed, busting through the doors. The manager of the store put the book he was reading down and stood up. When David reached the counter, the manager spoke up. "Is there something I can help you with?" "I need bread!" David shouted. "Well, you came to the right place," the manager said with a chuckle. David rushed to the aisle behind him and grabbed a loaf of bread. David downed the bread quickly and moved on to seconds. Then the seconds moved to thirds. David couldn't eat enough. Every bite filled him up. His energy finally returned, though he kept eating the bread. Excuse me. You have to pay for that, you know," the angry manager said from behind. Just then, the doors bolted open once again. David flew around and saw Andy, his old friend, staring into his eyes. David had him. He marched over to his old friend, grabbed him by the shoulders, and swung him around, throwing him towards the back of the bakery. Andy crashed out of the building, leaving a gaping hole through the back of the store. David watched as Andy stood back up outside and smiled. Then he saw him disappear, and he dashed to the right. David ran out the back and saw Andy climbing a ladder to the roof. David jumped to try to grab Andy, but ended up landing on the ceiling in front of him. As soon as Andy got to the roof, he looked back behind him and saw David wasn't down there anymore, so he started walking, and he saw David standing right in front of him, smiling.
"Hello, David."
"Don't give me that. You're a traitor of this country. Just tell me why you wanted me."
"Just business, my dear friend. Always business."
David watched as Andy grabbed his watch and clicked a button. Andy vanished right in front of him. David flipped open the phone he was given and dialed a few numbers. "Mulligan, NSA. Agent Mulligan, this is Agent Larson. I bumped into the traitor. He just used his time wash to escape." "We know. We've been monitoring the unauthorized leaps in time. It seems that your old friend has leapt into the year 2010. After hearing that, David did notice that Andy had looked older than he remembered. Agent Mulligan continued. "We're going to need you to use your watch. You have to travel to the year 2010. Do what you can to capture this maniac." David agreed and hung up. He lifted the watch on his wrist. It looked like an ordinary watch. It told the correct time. He clicked mode, and the watch went into the alarm. He clicked it again, and it went to the stopwatch. One more click got him to the date. Clicking set, David changed the year to 2010. Then he noticed the button in the middle on the right. Usually, watches have 4 buttons, one on each corner, but this one had 5. He clicked the 5th button, and the feeling he remembered came again. The feeling of his insides getting ripped apart came, and then the lovely part of the experience. The part where he felt like he was floating, then the feeling where he felt faster and faster, until finally, he was in the year 2010. The end. And just a reminder, 2010 is the future. I wrote this book 2007, 2006, somewhere around there. So this was, 2010, 4 years into the future, even though it was 10 years ago. Try to keep that in mind. 2010 is the future, for sure. Okay, so a couple of things. There's a couple of inside jokes in this book, most of which are taken from the first Breadman film that my brothers and I made back in 1995, I want to say. The first is the motorcycle. That was based off of the first shot in the first Breadman movie where Breadman is seen riding a bike. And at the end of this scene, Breadman gets off of his bike and says, in he goes to find a piece of bread laying on a table, which he kisses a couple of times, and that's where he meets his foe, Andy. Andy runs away. David chases after him. Andy tries to climb a building. David chases after him and lands on the roof as well. The time travel aspect wasn't introduced until Breadman 2, and I showed a clip of that in the last one, so you could check that out. And at the end of this scene in Breadman 1, I can't talk about because I continue it in a further chapter later on, if that makes any sense. So like I said, I wasn't creating a book just to create a book. I was trying to take the stuff that happened in those short films and just kind of revamp them and retell them and re-explain them in a fun way. Guys, tell me what you thought of chapters 9 and 10 in the comment section down below, and tell me if you liked it enough to hear chapter 11. And until next time, guys, peace out.